Fossil fuels have significant costs to the environment that we need to try and reduce in the future. Some of the pieces of the puzzle to reduce this is renewable energy, and we're going to discuss the related concepts with this. I'm going to start with the introduction on the costs of fossil fuels and the need for alternatives, and then we'll talk about solar power, wind power, and hydroelectric power. The first external cost of fossil fuels that I'm going to discuss is air pollution. Air pollution comes from fossil fuel combustion, and it releases particulates into the environment. This causes risk of illness and increased mortality risk. The WHO did a study and found that outdoor air pollution caused deaths. It includes heart disease, stroke, COPD, lung cancer, and acute lower respiratory infections in children. Another external cost are CO2 emissions. This accumulates in the atmosphere and assists in causing climate change. Other greenhouse gases also create additional issues. This is a pie chart and shows the breakout of CO2 emissions from global emissions total. And as you can see, fossil fuels are a major contributor to the carbon dioxide emissions. The CDIAC since 1751 found that 337 billion metric tons of CO2 have been put into the atmosphere, and we're putting billions of metric tons added annually. As such, we need to see a reduction in fossil fuel production and consumption, and we can do this by increasing renewable energy so that we don't have to significantly decrease our energy usage.
The first renewable energy resource is solar energy, which is just power harnessed from the light and heat of the sun. Solar energy is primarily used for water heating, but it can also be used for general heating, cooling, and ventilation of buildings. It is also used to produce electricity and for transportation. Solar power is clean and inexhaustible, which means it's sustainable and reduces pollution. It is mostly import independent, so we won't have to rely on other nations for our energy. In the picture, you can see the world consumed 16 terawatts of energy in 2010, and we had the capacity to produce 23,000 terawatts of solar energy in that year, which is more than enough. So why aren't we using solar energy? Solar energy is still very expensive because the technology is underdeveloped. The levelized cost of electricity is a measure used to compare methods of electricity generation. In other words, it is the minimum price at which electricity must be sold to break even over the lifetime of an asset. In this case, the asset is solar energy. You can solve for it using the equation on the slide. This chart shows the LCOE for various resources. Solar energy is the first and fourth columns, and as you can see, it is one of the most expensive resources to use, especially compared to some non-renewable resources. So it's not used as much simply because it is not as profitable as other resources because its costs are so high.
When talking about wind energy, we first need to understand just how big these things are. So for a typical GE 1.5 megawatt turbine, each blade is about 116 feet tall, and the tower itself that these blades stand on is 212 feet tall. So two of these 1.5 megawatt turbines, as big as they are, can produce over 6 million kilowatt hours in a year. The average US home uses around 11,000 kilowatt hours, so two of these turbines can produce enough energy to power 550 houses for an entire year. So some of the good externalities that come about are that you don't really run out of wind as long as there is a sun, because the sun drives wind power in the world. The second being that it doesn't require a lot of land, and it doesn't really ruin the land. In fact, you can use these places out in somewhere like Wyoming or in the Great Plains and farmland and still use the farmland. It will not affect the soil or the soil quality. Some of the negative externalities are that it's very large and it can be very loud, so people often don't want to see or hear these things. It does require a very large initial investment, and wind can sometimes be inconsistent. So unless you have the capital to build a proper wind farm, or if your wind varies in different directions throughout the day, wind power may not be the best option. But overall, when we think about the potential for wind energy, 4 million turbines combined throughout the entire world could supply enough electricity to power half of the entire globe.
For hydroelectric energy, what it is essentially is electricity generated by streaming or falling water. It supplies 20% of world electricity and 6% of total commercial energy. How it works, if you can look at the picture listed, it starts by a collection of runoff of seasonal rain and snow in lakes and rivers. This runoff then flows downstream and passes through the dam. While passing or falling through the dam, it turns a large turbine in the hydropower plant and converts it to mechanical energy to run the generator inside. At this stage, the shaft is then turned so that it causes rotation of magnets within the generator, and as these magnets pass through a copper coil, the magnetic field is created and helps aid in the production of electricity. Transformers are then used to increase the voltage of electricity, and this then helps it to reach its destination, and as soon as this step is complete, the water is released back into lakes and rivers. Water benefits, moderate to high amount of useful energy. There's a low maintenance and operating cost, and hydroelectric energy can have a lifetime of 2 to 10 times longer than that of coal and nuclear plants, and there's minimal pollution due to the absence of having to burn fuels. Drawbacks, however, the projects can take an extended amount of time to build, and as we saw in the Three Gorges Dam example, the payoff can take years to fully encompass economically the benefits. The large area required to build the dams is also a drawback. It can displace wildlife and disrupt natural ecosystems, such as disrupting river flow and disrupting aquatic life in the rivers from potentially reaching breeding grounds or larger bodies of water.